I'm going to share 3 things that are missteps in the qualifying process because we've been teaching and talking about the various stages of the sales process where people make mistakes. So when John covered for me last week, he spent a lot of time talking about how to make discovery calls better and how he qualifies around those. I'm a little bit more in the next section of further qualifying. So I'm assuming that first call has happened. And now we're in the middle of figuring out if we should work together and me making sure, especially before I do a proposal or send a contract or do something that's going to require a little back office work, I want to do a little bit more qualifying. So before I forget, I'm not sure everyone on here knows each other well. So don't hesitate because this is about sales. Best practices, you never know who someone's going to know. Just like I was able to mention that suggestion to Bruce about a referral, go ahead and put your info in the chat so that you connect with one another and you can be a resource. So thanks for being here. And we're talking about common costly missteps that people make while they're selling and especially while qualifying. So I'll hop into those points. Let me make sure I'm on speaker view. Yeah, good. Okay. Okay. So the first one I'm going to share, as I was thinking through what have I learned from all these years of selling? And one of the things that I still will slip into an old habit with, and that I see my clients make the mistake all the time, is around having a weak call to action. So call to action will sometimes be called a CTA, especially by a marketer. They'll say, "What's your CTA?" And your call to action, literally, to me, it means the next step that you are inviting someone to take with you. So CTAs are all over the place. They're on our website. It can be as simple as book a call. It can be schedule here with a Calendly link. It also is where these mistakes tend to really happen to me, where I see them is in the sales process, where we're getting off a call and we're not super clear about what's going to happen next. The reason this is a problem is because people are hard to reach and you have them with you. So we ought to go ahead and schedule the next step now. I also believe you know that in this community, part of the How Good Humans Sell framework is that we're always referencing ourselves as a guide and that we're solving, the hero is our customer, we're solving heroes' problems. And so if we're going to literally be a guide, to flesh out that metaphor further, we have to say, well, a guide is always in the front and they're directing where we're going. So let me say for a second, I know nobody's trying to be vague. And I completely understand that. It's sometimes out of nervousness. It's sometimes out of being rushed. Sometimes it's just lack of knowledge about what you actually can press for. But I'm going to make some statements here that I'm going to pause and give you a chance to ask me questions and interact around it, if you like. I think saying things like in an email, saying something like, let me know if you're interested, to me, it's just like the death knell because now you've done what I call making it weird because if they don't get back to you, you don't know how to interpret what's happening because you actually don't know if they didn't read the email carefully. You don't know if they're considering working with you, but they literally haven't made up their mind. You don't know if they haven't seen the message. You don't know if you're supposed to interpret it as, well, you said to tell you if I was interested, so therefore I'm not. I think there's no reason to create that weirdness when we can avoid it by being more specific. And again, I will do things and say things like that when I feel nervous because I don't want to seem too pushy. But that's where being more specific is actually a gift. It's a gift to them because we really do want to disqualify in or out. So vague calls to action, I'll name a few and then I'll pause and let you chime in with more. There would be things like, let me know if you're interested, or even getting to the end of a discovery call and saying, well, great, I'll follow up with you with next steps. That sounds like it's specific, but you actually missed the opportunity to schedule the next meeting. You didn't tell them what you're going to send, and you didn't require anything of them. So you've created work for yourself without any kind of commitment on their part for what's next. And so that is unfortunate because that can be avoided. So if you just hopped in, we're talking about common missteps, especially in qualifying clients. So one of the big challenges that I see is that when I feel nervous, when I feel scared, when I feel rushed, when I'm just not being very deliberate about my plan of what I want to know on the call, I'm kind of winging it. I will have weak calls to action at the end. And I'm arguing for specificity. Like if you have that person on the call and you want to have another call with them and you think they want to have another meeting with you, you want to go ahead and set that. When I had my cold calling firm, we represented a company that sold benefits packages to companies. And so there's a lot of people are used to there being an open enrollment in the fall related to health insurance, but this company also put together 401k plans and all kinds of stuff. So it was like really big kind of benefit packages. And people were actually all over the place on their enrollment date. And so it was very important to find out, we actually just made a decision, or we're not that happy, but we aren't going to begin consideration till X time. And part of what that company paid us for is we worked for them for over 4 years, because over time we knew everyone's cycles. And we had mapped all this with big companies they wanted to work with from that intel so that we could be a little ahead. I mean, to be honest, we'd be a little ahead of when they asked, because sometimes we found over the years that if we waited till the same time everybody else was calling, we actually couldn't get ahead. But we wanted to be real close to that date, they said, so that we were respecting them and planning ourselves around where we thought there was the most optimal consideration for them. So that reminds me, we had a lot of success with that for several years, similar to what you're saying, just ask, right? That I do a lot is I like to say, would you let me know if this is interesting to you? But I don't leave it there, because if I leave it there, again, I'm back in that problem where if I don't hear from them, I actually don't know how to interpret what it means. And I don't want to assume no, when I think John shared on the webinar last week that like 1 in 7 emails really gets opened and read if you don't know the person very well. And so since they literally could miss my follow-up if it's open to that interpretation. So for myself, for accountability, and for them, if I say, let me know if that sounds good, then I'll say, if we don't connect by Friday, I'll call you Friday. So see, then I put myself on the hook and I have to put it on my calendar. And I'm in that situation right now. I have a gentleman that wants to join one of my networking communities. I've worked with him before. We're pretty good friends. We've interacted together a lot, and he's making some decisions about which day. There's 2 chapters and there's 2 times, and he's deciding between them. And so he said, I need to talk to my sales guy and decide if I'm going to go all the time or he's going to be my sub, or if I'm going to buy 2 memberships. So I made him an offer for 2 seats. I made him the offer for 1 seat, and he said, I will decide this week. So when I typed all that up, I said, you said you're deciding this week. Let me know what you think. And if we don't connect, I'll call you Friday. I have to call him today. It's today that I have to get back to him. So it keeps the ball moving forward, because even though he's bought from me before, I could get in my own head and start to make it weird. Like, what does it mean that I didn't hear from him? And I just don't want to have any room for that. And a way you avoid making room for that weirdness is by staying in front of them. And so doing that in a way that is assertive, it's not aggressive, it's just clear. Just clear. That kind of leads to the second point I want to make, which is in the qualifying stages where we're trying to find out what are their goals. How urgent need, that's timing, right? Am I talking to the right person who actually can decide, or do I understand their decision-making process? Even if there's some people here who sell to an individual, even if it's an individual, if you can find out how they will decide, literally ask, how will you decide if you're going to move forward with coaching? How will you decide what products company you're going to buy from? If you will ask that question, they might say to you something like I would say, even when it's something Catherine Brown can buy for Catherine Brown. If I like the person and choose to share this, I might say something like, well, this is a personal purchase, but my husband and I have an agreement that anything that's over $1,500, I'm going to discuss with him just out of consideration. Sometimes I have shared that. They might not, but they might tell you, and then you're like, oh, great. How much time do you need for that? When should we schedule our next call, right? If you don't know because you didn't ask, then you start making assumptions. So we can make assumptions about anything that falls in what we call the magic topics, right? So in How Good Humans Sell, I know most of you have this or have a copy of this, but there is actually, let me tell you the page if you have it, and I'll read it to you if you don't. On page 95, we've got this diagram of the 5 magic topics. And what I'm saying is, I'm saying in a business to business sales context, these are at minimum the things we need to know. So we've got to understand how they're going to decide, what else they've tried, that's competition. What kind of money can they spend? We have to talk about the price. What are they trying to accomplish through this purpose? That's goals. And the urgency is timing. Making assumptions about anything about these is dangerous. And when I lose nowadays, after so many years of selling and teaching the stuff and writing the book and all the stuff, when I lose, it's almost always because I took a little nugget of something someone said and I decide it means a bigger answer and I make an assumption. So I want you to think for a second. Think about when you haven't won a piece of work. Think about when someone's gone to a competitor. Was there an assumption on your part or your salesperson's part that got you in that situation? And if it wasn't based on assumption of something you missed, what happened instead? Because I think there could have been something else that's not an assumption, but for me, it's usually something I missed because I was rushed. I had happy ears, which in sales is what we call it when we think, oh, when they say this, that means it's urgent. Or, oh, when they say this, that means they're not shopping around. We make assumptions. Can anybody think of a time that you thought you were going to win something? You didn't. And as you reflect on it, you think maybe that was one of those magic topics, or could have been an industry specific issue that is above and beyond the 5 magic topics, right? It could be something that's particular to your industry that you missed. This happens a lot with technical companies or financial services. There are additional requirements of things they have to find out in addition to the 5 magic topics, right? So brand specific things or technology environment specific things that also are considerations. Again, we're filling in the gap, or we're filling in the gap at least in our mind, and then taking action based on that. Okay, so let's run with that for a second. What do you do now when the silence occurs so that it's not an assumption? If you really want to, you can say, I'll call you Monday at 2. I mean, some people like to do that. I like to have a little more wiggle room than that. But what I do is I have it in my CRM, and I literally, if it's very important, like it's really important, I close this gentleman today on these 2 seats because one of the groups starts next week. And so I need to know if someone's coming because there's some things I have to get him and for some onboarding ahead of time. And so I purposely said Friday because I mean, I really do need to know Friday. But in another case, I might have given myself more room. Back on the silence thing, I actually thought initially that you meant on the call. And that's something too, right? So let's talk about that for a second. If you give a quote, you name your price table, things like this start at X dollars, and you name a price and there's silence, it's very tempting to freak out there too. I have in the past myself. And this comes straight out of some coaching training I had. I go periodically to executive coach training, even though I'm not a certified executive coach, because I like to watch people navigate conversations. And I learned this straight up from great coaches I watched. If there's a long silence on a call live, you can say something like, well, first I'll make sure it was clear. First I'll say, do you have questions about what I've said? Something like that. Then if they say no, but they're clearly still thinking and there's a long silence, you also could say something like, would you share with me what's going on in your brain? Now, that's a little risky because it's a would, and they could say, no, I won't. But I will tell you, I've never had anyone do that. So there's probably, 6 ways to Sunday to say that in different ways, but it's okay for there to be a space because a lot of people are thinking live in real time. And so the assumption on the theme of assumptions, the assumption we don't want to make is that this is bad. A lot of people are internal processors. They don't want to speak before they think about what they're going to say. That I'm going to go to the trouble to send a proposal or a contract. I feel like it is fair to ask for a time we're going to discuss it. Because if it's an RFP type of situation where they want you to give all this info, but there's no opportunity for interaction, you have a low probability of winning. So you got to really think about whether you're going to spend your time on that or not. So don't forget, that's one way to not have that happen. Sometimes they miss that call. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. Or maybe you have, like you said, Bruce, things from 2 years ago where it's outstanding because we didn't ask for that. And yet it's still sort of dangling out there. I love video for this. I've had great success hopping on something like I use BOMB, but I've seen people use a free version of Loom. There are these different tools, but if I've tried and left several messages and said, would you let me know what you're thinking? It's okay to say no. I want to know what's happening. If I've tried and I'm not getting a response, I will create a quick video. And I mean quick, like the John Way method is always under 2 minutes. He always says best practices under 2 minutes. So I really have to think about what I'm going to say, so I'm not rambling. And I get on and I say, Bruce, it's been a while since we've talked. The last time we met, you said X was important. I sent you this. It's been a long time since we've connected. Would you let me know? It seems like, you could have gone a different direction. This isn't a priority anymore, or it's time to revisit. Would you let me know what you're thinking? What I'm going to do is actually plan to call you Friday and see if that's a better way to catch you. But let's wrap this up one way or the other so I know how to follow up. So I'm like super breezy, super friendly, even if I'm crushed inside, right? I'm being super positive, and just saying, hey, a number of things could have happened, but I'm really calling them to account to give an answer because I believe that I was too concerned early in my career with seeming professional and respectful. And what I was chicken. I was scared to seem too aggressive. And you have to remember that if you really believe peers buy from peers, power buys from power, if all of those phrases are true in sales training, then I'm allowed to have there be a quid pro quo for the work I did. If you think I owe you a proposal and that you don't owe me a response, we're not peers. And I don't want to work with people like that anyway. I've gotten to the stage in my career where thankfully I can be pretty choosy. And so to me, that's not good human behavior. So I want to assume the best and call them to a higher action because that's what I would do for people I know, love, and trust. Gosh, I can't believe we're already at the end of our time. um, I am wondering, I think I'm going to save my third point for next time because we're talking about this idea of the traps, the common traps. So remember, we did weak call to action today and we did assumptions. These two things, so many challenges I see my clients have that we end up covering in sales training, that we end up talking about in one-on-one coaching calls, they fall in one of these two buckets. So watch for yourself today. Watch what you're saying and doing and make sure you're being as specific as you could be. And the remedy to an assumption is to ask the question. It's to ask the question that you're afraid to ask. If you will lean into it and ask it, you will get the answer you want to know. And you'll be so proud of yourself because you'll recognize, oh, my former self wouldn't have asked that, but my current self is going to ask that. And it makes you so proud. All right. Well, it's so good to see you all. I know it's Good Friday for many, so I didn't know if I would have anybody turn up, and I'm just delighted to see you. And I hope you have a great week. And I'll be here same time, same place next week. So I'll see you then.